Welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar today, The Privileged Pathway, Dissecting Recent Attacks in APAC and How to Prevent Them. Our speaker today is Senior Director Solutions Architect at BeyondTrust, Brian Chappell. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. Hello, everybody. I'd like to run through a couple of housekeeping items to touch on just before we get started with the presentation. All attendee lines are muted, but in an effort to keep the session interactive, I invite you to submit your questions live through the GoToWebinar console, and if we have time at the end, we'll jump into live Q&A. I will be monitoring those throughout the entire webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions whenever you have them. Also, today's session is being recorded. You'll receive a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 to 2 business days from now, and the slides can be immediately downloaded via the handout section in the GoToWebinar console. So at this point, let's hand it on over to Brian, who's going to jump right in. Hello, Brian. Welcome, and please take it away. The line's all yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone who's joined us here this morning. Unusually for me when doing webinars with the Far East, it is actually morning for both of us. I'm based in the UK, so just a bit of an early one for me. Today I want to talk to you about what we're calling the privileged pathway, kind of a route through planning your privileged access management approach within your organization, and here particularly relevant to the recent attacks that have happened within APAC and some of the ways in which we can address those. And we'll take kind of an interactive approach to this, of actually diving in and actually doing a hack during the course of this presentation. This is going to be a live hack, it's not a pre-recorded thing, so I'll just caveat that with anything can go wrong in these kind of things whenever we're trying to do something that complex live. But let's kick off and let's think initially about some of the things that have gone on recently within the APAC region. And while it's interesting to draw attention to these very much as APAC attacks, and there have been a raft of them, the scope and the type of these attacks is not actually that unique. There's very common standard themes that we see whenever we're looking through these kind of things. But what is interesting is that this has not been limited to public, private, or government environments. There's a whole range of organizations who are falling victim to the hacker across Asia Pacific. And here we're kind of just highlighting the Sing Health because it's the most recent, but it's important to realize that pattern I was talking about, that this is a common access pattern. Those who follow things like the Verizon DBIR will see this as one of the 9 patterns that you see there, with people getting into the environment, whether via some phishing attack or some kind of vulnerability exploit, and then seeking privileged credentials so that they can then move laterally across the environment to actually get to the important things in the network. And it's an important point to bear in mind that the initial entry point into most successful hacks is not the machine that actually had the information on that the hacker was looking for. They're always looking for this kind of 2-phase of land and expand, as they might say in sales term, but get into the network and then look to move laterally, so hop from system to system, looking for that key information. What is quite impressive in the wrong way is that, according to a study by Swift, the banking network, over 40% of organizations in Asia Pacific reported suffering a cyber attack in 2017, last year. Most of the attacks that plagued this region in recent years leveraged stolen or misused privileged credentials to move laterally across the network undetected. And that enables them to steal that sensitive data from your environment, and it makes it also harder for you to actually detect that going on, because it's utilizing entirely legitimate privilege within the network. They're just misusing that privilege, often in ways that are almost indistinguishable from legitimate access that's going on in the environment. Keys that tend to trigger you to notice them tend to be the volumes of data that are being moved back and forth. So we have these insights on how the attackers are consistently operating but how can we enforce the right security controls and drastically reduce the cyber risk as well? And some of this we need to focus around doing some of the basics better than we're currently doing it. And I'm not in any way attacking any one organization within this. This is something that I think across any organization who use IT is these repeated patterns of attacks are clearly demonstrating that in one area or another, we are not doing the best that we could in the basics of cybersecurity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through an attack and basically step you through some of the processes that are going to go on, you know, what you would expect a hacker to be doing in the background. Now, this is a contrived example. I've put together a system in my lab that will be prone to being hacked using this mechanism, but even today myself, I still was, somebody tried to hack me through this route. And when we get to that point, I'll point out exactly what it was and talk to you, you know, about the kind of simple things that you can just do as an individual when you're seeing these coming through. So I'm just going to click down here and move my mouse. There we go. Come on. No, it's going to take me back. Let me just end that show for a second. Okay, so I'm operating on a MacBook here. This is my lab that I use all around the world to demonstrate our products and also do conferences. So first things I'm going to do is I'm going to get over and I have a number of systems in my environment, and you will see screens flying through at the moment. Don't get too concerned. First one to look at here is I have a Windows 7 desktop. It's logged in as me. I have a standard user account. It's a domain account. This machine is sitting on an Active Directory domain, and it's a completely unchanged user. It's just create a user in the Active Directory, and then I logged into this system using it. The eagle-eyed among you will have noticed this other screen, which is a Kali Linux box, and this is the box that I'm actually going to be initiating the hack from. And I do also have running here in the background one of our products, which is PowerBroker Password Safe, and I'm going to be using this to talk about some of the ways in which we might be able to tackle some of the things we're going to see. But let's start in our world. Windows 7, most of us are trying to migrate towards Windows 10. Windows 10 is a more secure solution than Windows 7. Even Windows 8 and 8.1 were better than Windows 7, but I still see Windows XP out there. There is an enormous amount of Windows 7 out there, and that still has a number of vulnerabilities in it. I'm going to be utilizing something specific within a particular application. So I'm going to be doing most of my work in this hack from the Kali Linux platform here. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to open myself up just a terminal. I'm just going to put that to one side, and then I'm going to be using Metasploit for the majority of what we're doing today. And let me just get this to a decent size. I'm launching these rather than having them pre-launched for you guys because I wanted you to see them starting up and so that you got a feel for some of these tools that are out there. If my windows jump about, it's just my VM is sometimes a little bit slow in responding. So for those who don't know Metasploit, Metasploit and Core Security, they're probably the two key penetration testing tools that are large or widely available in the commercial space. Kali Linux itself, if you've not encountered this before, Kali is a build put together by a specific company, and they distribute this free of charge, and it includes many tools. If I show you here, there are lots and lots of different tools available in Kali Linux that can be used to help you do test penetrations on your environments. It's a great tool, and it includes this, which is the community edition of Metasploit. So our friends at Rapid7 do allow you to have this community edition. You can do a free trial of the Pro edition, and we're going to be using a very few actually of the 1,749 exploits that exist here within Kali, with the Metasploit. Sorry. These auxiliary posts, these are different kinds of elements to the tooling that operate at different points. We may get into some of those. We'll have to see how the time goes, because as I say, we are effectively doing this as a live hack, so we're going to be probably having some flexing in the time frame involved. So as a hacker, I'm going to start with a phishing attack. And, this is a common way of gaining access to environments. Recent DBIR reports have still shown, it's in the order of 15% of phishing emails are still clicked on. I think the very last report I saw had dropped to 12, but that's still in the order of 1 in 6 phishing emails is getting clicked on by our users. And one of the areas where we can do a better job of bringing our users along on the journey by employing some of the things I'm going to be talking about today to make security a more friendly part of our environment. So I'm going to get into Metasploit here, and I'm going to start by saying I'm going to use an exploit to start with. My target, we know it's a Windows 7 box, but this is something you might see somebody doing and just sending out randomly. We're using a file format exploit, so I'm actually going to use a poison file, and it's our good friend Adobe PDF, because I can be relatively confident that there are going to be some versions of Acrobat out there running which are susceptible to this particular exploit. So it kindly tells me that I've switched over to this exploit. Let me just see if I can get this window just a little bit bigger, and I'll probably do some resizing of windows as we go through. Metasploit is really nice. It will tell you about the exploit that we're using. So we can see here that it's a PDF escape social engineering with no JavaScript. It's targeted for Windows. It's in the Metasploit framework license provided by a guy called Jeremy Conway at Sudo Secure. We are targeting a fairly old version of Acrobat Reader. I've gone back this far purely so I have a very consistent mechanism to go through. But if you check things like the CVE databases or Exploit DB, you will find PDF or Acrobat Reader exploits up to very recent versions. This is just, as I say, somewhat contrived just so that we have something consistent. I'm just going to open this up a little bit wider this way. And we'll see under there are some basic options that are involved. So there's some exe names, a file name, a launch message, and we'll get into those in a little bit more detail. What we can do is we show options just to get the pieces that we actually need to mess around with to make this work. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a PDF that has a poison payload. It has an element in it that is an executable that's going to allow us to gain initial access into a system. You'll notice here the default file name being evil PDF. I think we can be fairly confident the majority of users are not going to open evil.pdf. There will be some, I guarantee there will be some, but let's kind of be a little bit more imaginative here. And I'm going to call this urgent sales order.pdf. And you can immediately imagine here who I'm about to start targeting. I've yet to find a salesperson who will think more than twice about clicking on something that says urgent sales order, but we hope to get them to be more engaged with us on this. One thing that we don't clearly see in these set options is that obviously there's going to be an executable in here that's going to be hidden inside this PDF, and we need to define what that executable is. So I need to set a payload for this, and I'm going to use a common element of Metasploit, which is the meterpreter, which is, think of it like a command line shell, which has got some nice additional elements in it that help me in hacking into environments. I'm going to use a reverse TCP version of this. Basically, this means that it's going to connect back to me. So this is a great way of gaining access, because a lot of organizations will not have firewalls on outbound traffic, only on inbound traffic, so that can be useful. If we show options again here, we'll see that there's a few extra things that have come into scope for us. Exit func, I'm not going to get into. If you want to know anything about these kind of things, get onto the Metasploit website. There's loads and loads of good examples on this. What I am interested in is the listen address and the listen port. As I said, this is going to connect back to me, so I need to tell it something about me so it knows where to look. So we're going to set lhost, and I'm typing these keywords in capitals purely so that it draws attention to them for you guys. There's no actual requirement to do this. So this is my my Carly's IP address, and I'm going to set a port of 4455 just because I like the look of it. And we'll just do one last show options here to make sure that we've got everything we need in there. We can see we've got a file name. I'm not too worried about that. You could create something different if for whatever reason you felt that the system we were hacking into was looking for particular executable names, those sorts of things. And later versions of Windows 2016 and 10 do have some stuff to stop some of these spawnings, but there are other routes around them. And we've got the details about who we're connecting back to. So I'm just going to run this exploit, and that's going to create a PDF for me. And we can see it's stored at this location. I'm just going to come over here, and I'm just going to move this to a location that is more convenient for what the next thing I'm going to do. So I'm just going to move that into my documents folder, and then I'm going to open up my email client. So here I would probably be heading off into the deep or the dark web, whichever element you want to consider it to be, and I would probably be utilizing this PDF with some kind of mass mailer, or in fact today you can actually get to sites that will generate the PDF for you as well. So there's some crazy stuff there. I'm just going to target myself here. I'm going to give it the title of urgent sales order, and I would have probably typed something in here like, hi, we've got some spare budget. We need to spend. Here's an order. I'd probably, as a hacker, I'd probably go into a bit more detail there, flesh it out a little bit. So maybe I've seen this product at a previous company, and I want to bring it into this company, and so here's a great opportunity to do it. And I've created the order off of some pricing I had in the past. Let me know if that's okay, kind of thing. Really kind of make this into an engaging email so it sounds positive, and finish it off with, let me know if this pricing's okay or not, if we need to revise. Really make the salesperson feel like they've got a proper engagement here. And we're going to attach our urgent sales order to that, and we're going to fire that off. So that's winging its way through the ether between my two systems here, and over here in my Windows 7 machine. Sorry, I'd forgotten to start my email client already. I'm just using Thunderbird here as a very simple client to get me started. And we'll see here, here's my urgent sales order. So my salesperson, I come in here, I see I probably get as far as I've got some spare budget before I'm double clicking on urgent sales order. And I get this message up, and who reads these dialogues a lot of the time? There's some stuff up here that says about potential harm, but it says here, to view the encrypted contents, please check the do not show this again and click open. And your average user probably wouldn't pay much attention to the command window you saw up, but they probably are going to start cursing at this point because it's a blank file. Now I could actually embed this in a templated file from somewhere else and actually put some detail behind this to kind of give a bit more of a background, but the thing is, actually I've missed a step because I wasn't paying attention to my screen, and I might have to go back around through that. I hadn't set up the listener, so bear with me a second, and we'll just step through that, and we'll go back and restart the hack on the other end. I missed setting up the handler. This is the piece that's actually going to listen to the connection out. I can't tell you how many times I've checked this today and got it right every time except for this one. And we can show options here again. This is multi. It works for any of the payloads that we've got out there, and it is just a handler. We do need to tell it which payload we're working with, so I'm just going to use the same one again. So it's going to be Windows Interpreter, and it's going to be the reverse TCP edition. And if we show options again, you'll see similar options to what we saw before. So we still need to tell it about our lhost being 172.16.27.145, and we still need to set the listening port so that we know which port we're actually going to listen to. And we do need to define this again, because you might have a system that's multi-homed. I need to know which interface to actually bind to for this. And when we run this exploit, we're just going to see the started the reverse TCP handler on that side. Now, because of the way this hack works, I'm just going to quickly have to bounce this machine. It doesn't take a second. Once that's restarted, we're going to reopen that file again, and that's going to cause that process to run and connect back to this machine. Now, these two machines are actually sat on the same network segment, so they're in the same subnet, but obviously it doesn't have to be. And some of the things I will do later are going to be things that are designed specifically to deal with a scenario of not being on the same subnet. So, as we said, it doesn't take long to get back in there, and we've got a nice long password in there, so nice safe password. So let's go back in there and get that open. And once again, we're just going to come in here, and I'm going to double click on that, and we should get the same message coming up again, and we're going to open that. Okay, so this time you already see something's happening. So this is literally how quickly, when the phishing attack hits, somebody can get access. Now, I could have used Metasploit to set up a spoof website and given a link in an email for somebody to click on, and that would have immediately got them into here using one of the exploits associated with IE, assuming they're using a vulnerable IE, but I would have used something that had multiple options there. But we appear to be connected to the interpreter here. So if I just do a dir here, you'll see that I'm connected to C users, bchap, app data, local temp. And we can see that there's a file here of btlab, bchapel.temp. So let's, just for a laugh here, let's download btlab plus bchapel.bmp. So I can actually pull that file down. I could open a file explorer at this end, and there's that file, and it literally is just that graphic, which is the graphic that is currently used for that user's profile. But this is how quickly and simply I can actually start getting data off of a machine. I can move to the root of the drive, and I can look and see there, and I can see stuff on the machine. I can negotiate around this machine. And you'll see me alternating between Linux and Unix commands. The interpreter responds to both. Obviously, this is hacking from a Linux environment, so we want to make it as easy as it can be for us as a hacker. But there's an important thing to note here. If I get the UID, I'm actually logged in here as Brian. You know, Brian ran the hack effectively. He's running the malware that's providing me with the access onto the system. As a hacker, this has got limited use to me. And this is one of the first stages where you can begin to limit the amount of access a hacker has by keeping your users as standard users, implementing the principle of least privilege within your environment. Nobody actually logging directly into systems as local admins or domain admins or any kind of elevated account. There are mechanisms we can use to enable them still to be productive. But our friends over at Metasploit have given us a command that will try and get us the system access. So that's the actual root level effectively in Windows. And we'll see this actually fails in this instance. I want to show, to get you the feel of what a hacker's going to go through here. So get system is a classic approach. It will try and get you. See, it tried 3 ways to find a way of getting me to system. Now, if I were logged in as an admin, that would have given me system level access to the machine, but it didn't. So we have to think a little bit more out of the box. So I'm going to run a post intrusion exploit here. And we're going to use a Windows one, obviously, we're on a Windows machine, and we're going to gather some information. And I'm going to have a look and see how well patched this machine is. So this is going to look at the system, and it gives us some possible vulnerabilities here that we have in the environment. And this is another key area, the whole WannaCry and the NotPetya attacks were as successful as they were because people weren't keeping up to date with some of the critical patches, and particularly the patches that have known exploits for them. Those are critical spaces in which you've got to keep up to date. So using a tool that allows you to target the vulnerabilities with the exploits first, irrespective of the severity level of that vulnerability, is fundamentally important, because anyone who's looked at exploit DB or any of the other kind of the repositories out there will know there are fully crafted examples on how to break into these things. So, this is what Metasploit is built on top of, is that kind of information. So to avoid being the low-hanging fruit, the kind of people who got the kind of intrusion that I've just achieved initially here, clearing off those first will make your life better. And I can guarantee you that clearing those off will be a small fraction of the number of high severity vulnerabilities you have in your environment. Everything after that in the high severity, I'm going to say, is academic in inverted commas. We've seen with the NSA and other organizations recently that there are some organizations who do or have discovered or built exploits for some of those vulnerabilities. But on the whole, you get rid of those, the rest are going to be somewhat academic. Someone's actually got to sit down and work out how to break into them. And believe you me, they're going to be coming in by this kind of tool first and foremost. So if we look down this list, and actually let's just do ASUS info here so you can get a better view. So we know we're on a Windows 7 machine and we're running Service Pack 1 here. There is a Windows 7 exploit here, but it doesn't appear to be Service Pack 1. If we look down here, we've got one here that is Win 7, Service Pack 0, and the Service Pack 1. So let's have a look at this MS13 053. I'm going to stick this session into the background so I can come back up into the Metasploit framework, and I'm going to use exploit again, and it's Windows, and it's local. I have some tab completion here if you think I'm typing really quick. And we're going to type MS13, and it's 53. So there's the Schlamperei, and we're going to get that loaded. Let's have a quick look at the show options. So again, it seems to have a limited amount of things. We have session. We do still need a payload in this. We need a payload in just about everything. So I'm going to go back to my interpreter again, and we're going to use exactly the same approach as we used before. Now, when we show options, we'll see some of the things that we're getting quite used to seeing now, needing the L host and the L port, but there is the session piece up here as well. So we're going to set the session, and if we scroll back a little bit, we'll see that we backgrounded this as session 1. So we'll use our existing session 1, and we will set our L host. We know that now as 27.145, and we're going to set a new L port here, and we'll use just the next port up from the one we've got. So we've got everything we need to actually start a second kind of hack here. Metasploit kindly lets you use the word run, but sometimes it's just nice to type exploit, which does exactly the same thing. They're just analogous of one another. So on that other session, it's gone and launched Notepad to host the exploit. The process is launched, and we then inject the exploit DLL into that process and then trigger the exploit itself. And we'll see here, this is always the bit that you tend to be crossing your fingers on when you're doing a hack. Everything seems to have worked okay. Let's wait for a shell, and it says a system shell. So we've got a second interpreter session opened here, and if I do the get UID here, we'll see we now have NT authority system, because an age-old vulnerability has not been patched on this system. And if you're thinking, hey, no, we're great with this, we've got everything covered, you only have to look through recent DBIR reports to show that, I don't think they did it last year, but the 2 years previous, they showed how old hacks were that were being used, or vulnerabilities. And from the 2015 data, there was a 1999 exploit being used. And in 2016, we didn't get any better because it went down to 1998. There's lots of this historic stuff floating out there, and not having a good scanner to look across your environment and know what's out there is going to mean that you're not finding systems that have been hung on the network by somebody else Relying on things like Active Directory for all your Windows servers is only going to tell you some of what's out there. You need to be scanning this stuff. But now we've got access to system, we literally have the keys to the kingdom to this box, and we can do a hash dump. And pass the hash is still out there as an exploit that can be done. It is becoming a lot harder to do, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that the days of pass the hash are over. And here we have the hash for the local administrator, a user called Brian on this machine, and the guest account. So if you are one of those environments where unfortunately for one reason or another you've got a standard build, say of workstations or servers, and you use the same administrative password across all those environments, I have everything I need there to be able to move laterally across your environment. That will allow me to authenticate to the local user accounts across the environment. I do have our password safe product running here, which is a privileged password manager, and that has set different admin accounts across the environment. So I'm not even going to try going down that route because it's not going to get me very far. What I'm really looking for, I guess, at the end of the day, is to get some domain credentials. So we can look at another one of those kind of post Windows gather exploits. So this is just getting information. So I can enum. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there. I want to do a cache dump here. So you've probably noticed with your Windows workstations, if they're laptops, when you take them away from the network and you're off the domain, you can still log in. And that's because by default, Windows caches the last 10 logins to a Windows system. You can adjust that down to 0 so it doesn't remember everything. Kind of annoying for traveling users, but on this situation we're going to actually have a look, and we can see that the setting is 10, which is the default. And there we go. I've just poured through the machine using a little script, and I can see the Chappell account, which is my domain account. We can see these all end with the domain names. This is obviously the FQDN and the NetBIOS names. There's an administrator user and there's a tech support user in here as well. That's kind of interesting from a hacker perspective. Now, it mentions this being in John the Ripper format. Another tool that's on this environment is a tool called John. Or John the Ripper, which can be used to brute force passwords. So I can take the output from this, which is saved in this location for me, and you'll see often there are bits of information saved off in various locations across the environment for me. And I didn't need to massage that a little bit. I put it into John the Ripper and I put a dictionary across it, and I will start attacking those passwords. And I could be lucky. We still see in the regular reports the number of common passwords that are still out there being used: 1 2 3 4 5 6, or you're really clever and do 6 5 4 3 2 1, or God, or secret, or password with a 4 and some 5s and a 0 and all those kind of things. So dictionary attacks still quite valuable there, but we could go one stage further. There's a tool out there called Mimikatz, and there is an element of Mimikatz here in the environment. It's not the most up to date, and it's not the most elaborate Mimikatz that you can get your hands on, but it is here, and we can do a help Mimikatz here, just to show us some of what we can do. So there's some things here about retrieving credentials. So if I start with an MSV, which is a relatively common one, this is to retrieve the actual hashes. So we can see here, it's picked up the hashes, and it seems like a relatively limited number. It's slightly different. We don't see administrator for the domain, and we don't see tech support. That could be because if we do a post Windows gather enum logged, can't type at this time of the morning, in users, we can see who's, oh, I've mistyped something here. I just logged on users. Should think I'm talking to Windows. We log into Unix and Linux, we log on to Windows. And we can see that actually we only have me logged in here for the moment, but we can see that other people have logged onto this box as well, and we can see their SSIDs. So maybe as a hacker, what I want to do is maybe I want to fiddle around with the person's machine, maybe creating some odd shortcuts on their desktop or deleting shortcuts on their desktop. And obviously, because I'm in here in their environment, I can talk to their machine. So that's actually the Windows folder, but I could come in here and I could go into users, Brian B. Chappell, and start deleting icons off the desktop in an effort to get them to give the tech support team a ring. So let's say that I've done that. I've called the tech support team and they're remoting into my system. So they're going to log in using their account, and they're going to start doing some work for me. So tech support. And this I might get wrong a couple of times as I type it. As you can see, this is a pretty long password because we're security conscious. And we're logged in as our tech support user, and they're going to start having a look around the environment. If I come back to my interpreter, and maybe I'm periodically just having a look to see who's logged onto the environment, and suddenly I see that tech support have logged in. So my ruse has worked. I've gotten somebody logged into the machine. And if I do the MSV here, you can now see that I can pick up their hash for their login in the environment. And I could use that to work down the route of pass the hash attack. But this is where Mimikatz gets a little bit scary. It was almost kind of like a dare that Windows was fine. You could never get the raw text of a password from a Windows environment unless you know where to look. And we'll find here's the password for B Chappell, and here's the password for tech support. So now I have the credentials that I need. There are other things I could look. I can look and see, I could enum the groups associated with this user. I can look around the environment. I'm probably going to be a bit lazy here, and I'm going to run one kind of last post exploit here, Windows gather, and we want to enum, let's go AD computers. This will look out from this machine and just have a look at the Active Directory systems that are out there. And I can immediately see I've got a domain controller that I can spot. Could be an interesting place to go. I've also got another machine out here. Could also be interesting to have a look at. So I might end up having a poke around both of these systems. And I can jump to those using a number of routes. But ideally, I want to get full access into these machines. So I'm going to do an RDP session to these machines. But if we think, initially I said, in this scenario, we need to imagine that I'm not on the same subnet. So I'm coming in from outside. The only machine I have on the network is this machine that I've compromised. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it into a port forwarder for me. So I'm going to say I want the port 3389 local to my machine here to be redirected towards P3389 on lab bi01.bt lab.test. So that's created a relay for me. So I can come up here to my desktop here and my other shell, and I've typed this earlier to save myself a little bit of time. So here is that password, my really hard password. I have to escape the dollars on a Unix command line, but you notice I'm connecting to myself here. So if I hit this is going to start connecting. It's asking me if I want to accept the certificate because it doesn't match the one for the machine. We are security conscious, obviously. And here's tech support logging in to a server on my environment. Server manager starts because that's the way I have my systems configured. And if we click on this, we'll see that I'm logged in as tech support on this box. Now, we know through this, and I'm telling you that tech support is a domain admin. So I've gotten into this environment using an elevated credential. You know, in the majority of times, you probably would have to do some more digging around as a hacker to find out if this account had elevated credentials. But the fact that it's being used to log on to a user's workstation to do some work, and it's got some kind of relation to tech support, you can almost guarantee that this is some kind of elevated account. So on this machine, I could create backdoors. I can look at the kind of files that are out here, and maybe I notice fairly early on in that when I'm looking around that maybe we notice this machine has got SQL Server running on it. And hey, let's have a look in here. There's some data here. Now this is my privileged password management machine, and I have deliberately opened it up to enable me to do this, just to give you an example of a database, because this was particularly relevant to many of the hacks that had happened. So here there are database files, but FreeRDP doesn't really allow me an easy way of doing copy and paste through this onto a Unix environment. So I need to think about this perhaps a little bit more laterally again. So what if I modified my port forwarding here? And started forwarding the SMB ports as well. And I come back over to my my file tool here and look at other locations. And I say that I want an SMB session to myself. And I'm going to try and connect to a $C share. So obviously in most environments, we'd kill off things like the admin dollar and the $C wherever we can, but you know, they do still exist out there. And we can use a registered user account, which is called tech support. We know that it's on the BT Lab domain, and it's my really hard password to connect me. I'm going to forget this immediately because I don't want this coming up next time I try and connect, but we're just going to see if we can actually make that link. And away we go. So now I have a connection through that machine on the network directly to the file system of the target machine that I'm looking at through the RDP session, which is just behind us here. And we can come in here and we can see exactly that same data, and now I can copy it directly using that machine that I saw as a conduit to get me to it. Now my SQL Server is still running on that box, and I'm not about to shut it down, but I'm admin here. I could stop the SQL Server engine process, which would release the locks on these files so that I could then copy them off. You know, I could try copying this file here, just as an example, to show us that we can copy and paste from one system to the other. So there you go. Data pulled off of that target system onto my local machine. Now, as I say, I am on the same subnet, but this is in no way dependent on me doing that. Those port forwardings have allowed me to go directly to that machine and gain access to them. I have tools here that I could create further payloads to leave on those machines to provide me with ongoing access. And a lot of the stuff that goes on here these days also has auto cleanup behind it, so it will take out log files of what I've been doing, so I barely even have to worry about those sorts of things. So this is just showing you how relatively simple it is to put together a hack, and I can tell you now that you can actually piece together the majority of this hack just from looking at freely available information on the internet. This is not complicated stuff. And this is why, you know, even in the UK, we had a hack of TalkTalk a couple of years ago, and it was 3 teenagers who did this, because this isn't difficult stuff if we're leaving the holes open. Now, ideally, what we want to be doing, and I'm just going to log out of these two of the session there. We want to be using tools that give us the capability to be in control of the environment we're operating on. To save time here, because I'm conscious that I've gone a little longer than I wanted on the hack, but I wanted you guys to see that and experience the simplicity with which that can happen. I'm not saying that every hack is ever going to be like that. You're going to have to do a lot more digging in many cases, and a lot of the tools that are out there on the dark web are actually going to provide you with all the mechanisms to do that, to do the scanning, to find out what's on there, to drop payloads out there and provide you with beautiful customer service on the back end that's going to allow you to operate. And this is where my my SQL Server looks like it's going to do its usual demo thing and run really, really slowly for me. Our tool is built on top of SQL Server, and we use all elements of it to give you a very rich environment. So here we are, we're into the environment. So password safe is the piece that's the privileged password manager. So that enables you to bring systems on board and get control over a lot of those passwords. So that tech support account I do have in here, but I'm not automatically managing it. By default, using this kind of tool, what I do is I would enable that to automatically change the password every time it's used. It looks like I've got a hiccup. I may have caused some instability myself here. So that every time somebody used that tech support to access somebody's machine, I would change the password immediately afterwards. So while you could see there that if someone was lucky enough to get in during somebody being logged in with that account, yes, there could potentially be an exploit there, but I would go one stage further, and that tech support account would be a standard user account, and I would use another tool called PowerBroker for Windows to elevate the activities that they were doing. So getting onto another machine with that account would not allow the user to be a privileged user. They'd be a standard user at all times. So privileged password manager is going to then be there to allow me to keep control of things like the local admin password, my root passwords, my firewall passwords, my router passwords, and allow me a mechanism to access those in a secure, controlled way with full workflow. And then for day-to-day activities, users are never going to be interacting with a privileged account directly. They're only ever going to be logging in using a non-privileged account, so eliminating the risk of that lateral movement, and then only able to do specific tasks related to their role through some very granular controls. And it's way beyond what I can show you within the course of an hour here. But certainly something that if you're interested, we'll pop up a poll at the end, and you've got the opportunity to say you'd like to follow up, and we can show you more detail about how you can extend on and gain some additional controls there. But just utilizing a tool like this for the access, when that capability is turned on, and I come in here and I'm saying that here we're testing in a demo, and I want to open an RDP session towards that machine using the tech support account. This will open an RDP session for me within this environment, and again, my SQL Server, you can't see it, but at the top of my second screen, I can see my processors, and they're all maxed out at the moment. I'm running quite a lot in my little lab. Kali is not the smallest tool to be running. I get an RDP session that's going to be brokered through Password Safe with full session recording and 4 eyes monitoring as well, so that you can keep a track of what's going on in those sessions. And those sessions can be set to do things like automatically terminate at the end. You can force termination, you can lock them, you can do all kinds of cool stuff there to maintain control. And I apologize that this is taking a little longer than expected. I am asking quite a lot of my little laptop here. So this is going to open a session. This may also take a little while because of my lab being a little loaded. This kind of screen you see here can be rebranded with your logos and words in here, but it provides you with a safe way of beginning to control things. While that's going on, I'm going to step over here, and I'm just going to step over back into another view within the tool. PAM is one element of controlling the environment, and I mentioned vulnerability management as well. And vulnerability management is something that we have at our heart as well as PAM, which is quite unusual in this space and gives us what I think is quite a unique view. Because we understand the vulnerability side of the house, we also, I think, understand privilege a little better than some organizations. So being able to marry the two together, because nearly every attack over the past 10 years follows that pattern of vulnerability, whether the exploit starts as a phishing attack or by an external attack, it coming in as vulnerability and then looking to gain privilege and elevate to move laterally across your environment, it just naturally brings those two things together. And while again we're talking to my database here, you'll see there's a column here called exploit count, and I'll just give that a couple of clicks. And this is what I'm going to want to target when I'm looking at fixing my environment. So this would become my to-do list. It's a very small lab I have running here because I've had to shrink it down for this event. But I can tell you where I have 18 high severity vulnerabilities, I think there's only about 10 that have actually got known exploits, and some of those are medium, some of them are low, some of them are even informational, so you may never get to them in your list, while the exploit itself or the vulnerability itself is not a high severity. It provides a perfect foothold in the environment for you then to step on as a hacker, to look around, to look for another opportunity to gain some additional privilege in the environment. And sorry, you can still see my my database here is having a bit of a hissy fit. I guess it is. It's almost 3 a.m. here, so I think it's thinking it's time for its bed, and I won't be far behind it. But Beyond Insight is our platform. It links together all of the tooling that we have, the least privilege, the vulnerability, and the privileged password management. And those are what I consider to be 3 of the foundational elements when building a good cybersecurity practice. If we get those 3 things right, then we eliminate a vast majority of the hacks that are out there. In fact, if Gartner and Verizon are to be believed, over the past 7 years, around 95% of those successful attacks are all the result of well-known and entirely preventable vulnerabilities. And then go on to exploit privilege because we're not doing a good job there. If we can deal with both of those things, to be honest with you, we have ripped the teeth out of the majority of hacks. I'm not saying somebody won't get in, but they're going to have nowhere to go when they get there. We're able to limit the scope because there's nobody logging in directly with a privileged account, and we're rotating passwords so that we've eliminated the majority of opportunity for lateral movement. Now, I've run a little bit longer on that than I was hoping. I did have a few more slides, which you'll find in the handouts so that you can just go through there. There's some more stats in there. But I just want to give an opportunity for people to see the poll and for Sarah to round out with the last elements within that. I hope you found that informative. I'm sure some of you have, this is old hat to you, and I apologize if you haven't seen anything massively new, but as I say, even just today I received an email with a PDF attached to it that looked like a DocuSign email that was trying to encourage me to go that route. So people are still using it because it's still working, so something to be conscious of. And on that point, I will hand back to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Okay, guys, it's time for our poll. You should see this pop up on your screen. If you would like to schedule a personalized one-on-one demo or a deeper conversation about any of the things that Brian has talked about, anything that related to PAM, vulnerability management, some of the Beyond Insight that Brian was talking to you about, please select yes, and somebody will reach out to you. They will be in contact and schedule that conversation with you guys. We want to help you protect your organizations. Please say yes. You won't hurt my feelings if you say no, it's okay, but I will leave this up in case if you're making a last minute decision, and let's dive into a couple of questions. If you have any questions, please submit them right now within the questions panel. And I have a couple that came in while Brian was speaking. So Brian, can you explain how difficult it is to implement PAM? Somebody's asking, how difficult is implementing PAM?
That's a good question, and obviously something that's critical when we're looking at these sorts of things. Each of the things, those core pillars I've talked about, are simple technologies when you approach them the right way. But there is a lot of work to be done up front. Let's not be shy about this. Often we're having to do this within operating environments, so we need to look at how we can roll these out in strategic ways to ensure that we're having as little impact on our users at any point. And there's a fundamental thing of doing this right. Good security is virtually transparent to the user who legitimately needs access. It only becomes opaque to those who are trying to gain illegitimate access. So within that, there's a piece of initial study and initial analysis to be done, and then there's an implementation to be done on top of that. And you just need to be considered in that. It's not difficult. You just need to take that initial step to get your thought process the right way around, especially when we're thinking of least privilege. We've been told for decades that we have to control what the administrator does. And while I've kind of said it very quickly, when we're looking at least privilege, we're going to take standard users and give them additional capabilities, but on an application by application basis. So it becomes very specific and very targeted. And once you get your head into that kind of way of thinking, the security model is simpler. When we're managing privileged passwords, shared privileged passwords for a PPM system, privileged password management, the security model gets simpler. And that's what we got to work towards. Making these models simpler means it's easier to implement. It's also going to be easier to manage and maintain.
Another one for you, Brian, came in from Ryan. If I encrypt the PDF at least 10 times, will a regular AV or anti-malware detect the anomalous file?
That's a good question. I would say it's not going to, probably even on a single encryption through, unless somebody decrypts the file onto the local file system. Obviously, it doesn't matter how many levels of encryption you put on it, it's going to get decrypted at some point. And actually, in the later versions of Windows, they're actually looking for the mechanism by which that exploit is launched. That's actually, and that's the thing that's actually going to get blocked. I'm sure as we move forwards, we're going to see more and more elaborate ways of getting those payloads through, even to using the kind of fileless exploits in a pre-scripted way as part of the payload, where we can take take a running process and effectively replace its code with something that we want to execute without actually ever writing something to the file system. So, depending on what your AV is looking for, there's a good chance it's going to find things like the Meterpreter payload, because it's well known. But if you build your own payload and stick that in there, if it's not known, it's not going to be seen. That's kind of one of the fundamentals of the AV. If you've got endpoint protection, those can be a little bit more elaborate in the way they approach things, but often they're still reliant on looking for the things that they know about already. Hopefully that kind of answers the question.
Okay, I have one more question for you, but let me close down this poll, you guys. Thanks again for joining in on that. Brian, can you explain how your Windows agent would help vulnerabilities running?
I would help them running or help them not running. The agent that we have on Windows, so PowerBroker for Windows as the least privileged tool, that has some capabilities because it's being called by the operating system as a process starts. So as you launch a program, the operating system tells us about it. We can make some assessment on that process, and PowerBroker for Windows comes with a subset of our vulnerability information. By a subset, I mean all the vulnerabilities, just less information about them, because all we need to know if it is an application that's starting actually vulnerable, and we can make a decision through a rule to say, I'm not going to let applications that have vulnerabilities under certain criteria from running, or I can prompt the user ahead of time to warn them and provide them with mechanisms for override. But we're there at that beginning. We're able to stop that process running if we need to. And there's also some patented technology within that also enables us to, by default, where a piece of malware will try and use the privilege of the process it's exploiting, because that's what it's looking for, is that privilege, that technology prevents that privilege from being inherited and drops that malware back to being a standard user again. So at every point, we're just kind of keeping it locked down to that standard user, which limits the opportunity for the hacker to actually make good use of that malware. And I really do see it as it sounds like a pretty aggressive phrase, but it does rip the teeth out of the hack, so the hacker gets no further forward in that process. And PowerBroker for Windows is really very useful at making sure that operates in that way.
Okay, folks, it is time to wrap up. Be on the lookout for the post-webinar email, and it will be containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today. Within 2 business days from now, it will come from communications@beyondtrust.com. So make sure that email has been whitelisted within your email client so you receive it without any interruption. Brian, wow, thank you so much. That was a full hour of you talking. Thank you so much. Go drink some water and go get some sleep. And everybody who attended live today, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you guys spending 60 minutes with us, learning about what BeyondTrust is doing in the space, and we hope that you guys can join our next one. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you at the next webinar. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.